Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topics for tonight are sending proxies to Xinjiang and a Greek tragedy begins. So let me go right to our first piece on sending proxies to Xinjiang. It's a piece by Mike Whitney. And I'm sharing it now. And I have the arrival of Dee Piers, my good friend and the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Well, Merry almost Christmas, Dee.
Yes, Merry almost Christmas to you.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I wasn't sure whether you would want to make it tonight because it is almost Christmas.
Yes. Yeah, I was busy doing things here, and then I was like, yeah, I want to join Joe.
Okay, thank you. So I put up the first of the articles, but I'm looking at our comments now here, and I see Lana Dell is here. It says, "Hi all. Thanks for coming to our healthcare live stream last night, okay, with Willie Bragg. I thought that was a very good stream. Okay, I thought that you and Dave did a fine job. I did have some nits to pick when it comes to some facts, but we can talk about that later." Steve Wolfbrand says, "Hello, everybody." The Earl of Lurie says, "Atlanta Dell hates the clock. Thank you." And Evelina is here. She says hi there. And the Earl of Lurie greets Steve Wolfbrand, saying hey. So thank you all for coming. I know it's a busy night. Don't really expect but too many people to arrive, but do share, like, and subscribe so as many people arrive as might be tempted to watch a little bit tonight. Meanwhile, actually, before I start on that article, I think I'm going to share this on Facebook.
Like Colby.
There we are. It's this one that I want to share. Colby is having a tough time tonight, huh?
Yes. It always seems the girls can fall asleep and he can't, and he gets so upset.
Yeah, I don't blame him. Okay, so back to the piece. I guess I'll start off with that first piece, okay? Actually, that should be Washington deploys proxies to Xinjiang to scuttle China's giant infrastructure project. Now, I have to say, just right off the bat, that is really scurrilous. It's not as if the giant infrastructure project is a military threat, to the United States. It's not about our national security. It's just China trying to do something creative with many, many nations of the world. An appropriate counter from us would be to do the same thing. Instead, we're deploying proxies to Xinjiang. I think that's pretty disgusting behavior. But to hell with the moralizing. Here is a picture of a Chinese female warrior. I don't know what she's holding in her hand because the photo was cut off, but it looks like a weapon of war. A Uyghur separatist group that helped to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad has declared its intention to return to Xinjiang in order to conduct uh, 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 military operations against the People's Republic of China. The announcement suggests that Washington and its allies are preparing to open up another front in a war that has already plunged large parts of Eastern Europe and the Middle East into chaos. The announcement was mostly ignored by the Western media. Yeah, the Western media is hiding all that stuff from us because the government doesn't want us to know what it's doing in the far-flung corner of the world, lest we come to see the truth that the world's leading aggressors are us. Going on. The announcement was mostly ignored by the Western media, but analysts believe we may have entered a new phase in America's struggle to preserve its waning hegemony, a phase in which the probability of a direct clash between the United States and China has increased dramatically. Uyghur fighters in China vow to come for China next. Uyghur fighters in Syria vow to come for China next. The Turkestan Islamic Party says its main mission to liberate the Muslims of East Turkestan from the Chinese occupation. The Turkestan Islamic Party have been training in Syria. This is from Sofia Yan in Istanbul. I guess that's the photo is from Sofia Yan in Istanbul. They can't be training in Istanbul. Also, if we assume that Washington's sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline was designed to prevent the economic integration of Russia with the European Union, then we must assume that the same blueprint will be applied to China. Washington will use its Uyghur proxies to sever the critical arteries that link China to Europe, thus blocking the rise of a free trade superstate that would severely undermine the regional influence of the United States. This means we should expect a wave of asymmetrical attacks on vital infrastructure aimed at preventing the development of China's signature Belt and Road Initiative. More on this later. As always, U.S. foreign policy is guided by the despotic credo called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which states the following. The quote from, I assume, Mr. Wolfowitz. Our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere that poses a threat on the order of that posed formerly by the Soviet Union. This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control be sufficient to generate global power. Central Asia, okay, this is, I'm sorry, end quote. Going on with Mike Whitney. Central Asia is the hill on which the U.S. empire has chosen to die. That's a very strong statement. Even so, a quote, cornered, unquote, superpower that is armed to the teeth and led by ravenous war hawks can do considerable damage before it is brought to heel. That said, Washington's focus on Central Asia is thoroughly understandable given the fact that the area is on track to become the most prosperous, most populous, and prosperous region in the world. Here's how Zbigniew Brzezinski summed it up in the Grand Chessboard in 1997. Quote, for America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. This is from page 30 of his book, The Grand Chessboard, in 1997. And yes, Brzezinski is the father of Mika Brzezinski, Joe Scarborough's co-host and wife on the Morning Joe show on MSNBC. Quote, for America, the chief political prize is Eurasia. Eurasia is the globe's largest continent and is geopolitically axial. A power that dominates Eurasia would control two of the world's three most advanced and economically productive regions. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia, and most of the world's physical wealth is there as well, both in its enterprise and underneath its soil. Eurasia counts for 60% of the world's GNP and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources. While Brzezinski, end of quote. While Brzezinski helps us to grasp Eurasia's importance vis-a-vis America's ambition to maintain its grip on global power, political analyst Li Jingling provides the details of why the U.S. has chosen to use the Uyghurs as a means to destabilize Central Asia. Check out this riveting video that explains Xinjiang's geostrategic importance and how it led to the creation of the Uyghur genocide hoax. So I am going to play this riveting video because it is very short. So let me stop sharing the article for a moment and start sharing the riveting video. There we go. So there is Li Jingling. She says why the U.S. wants to separate Xinjiang from China because its location is too crucial for them to destabilize Eurasia. In this video, I laid out the strategic location of Xinjiang and how CIA experts planned long ago to destabilize China by playing the Uyghur card. So let me pull this back to the beginning.
Do you know why the US wants to separate Xinjiang from the rest of China? Because Xinjiang's location is way too important geopolitically. So here, China can bring something to the entire Eurasia that some US politicians scare the most: peace. Let me explain why. First, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region located in northwest of China connects China with Central Asia. Xinjiang shares borders with 8 countries: Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Xinjiang wasn't just a key hub in the Asian Silk Road, it's also a key gate for the current Belt and Road Initiative to expand westwards. It will connect East Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, and Europe. This is the region that the US government and several Western countries have been spending billions of dollars in the past decades to sponsor terrorism, wars, and instabilities. The textbook divide and conquer strategy. Because Eurasia is too big. If they unite, they will be too strong. And that is threatening for the US to maintain its exceptional position in the world. In other words, hegemony over the world. However, China's Belt and Road Initiative are bringing infrastructure and economic development to this region. China-Europe railways go through here. Billions of dollars of trades taking place at the ports in Xinjiang. And this economic development will raise the living standards of people living in this region. And when people are much better off, there will be no reason to participate in wars and terrorism. So the US came out with a plan. How about we support separatism and divide Xinjiang from China? In the 1990s, this political analyst named Graham E. Fuller, who served both in the National Intelligence Council and CIA, wrote a report called The Xinjiang Problem. In this report, he was teaching his fellow politicians and scholars how to play the Uyghur card and stoke separatism among Uyghurs to destabilize and contain China. If you don't believe my words, how about listening to the words of retired U.S. Army Colonel Lawrence B. Wilkerson himself? He used to serve as the chief of staff to the U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell.
The one I spent 31 years in, the military. Here is what it has decided for Afghanistan. And I bet you don't know this either. We're in Afghanistan as we were in Germany post-World War II. That is for at least a half a century. It has nothing to do with Kabul and state building, nothing to do with fighting the Taliban or proving that we can reconcile with the Taliban, and nothing to do with fighting any terrorist group, because it is the only hard power the United States has that sits proximate to the Central Base Road Initiative of China that runs across Central Asia. If we had to impact that with military power, we are in position to do so in Afghanistan. And second reason we're there is because we're cheek and jowl with the potentially most unstable nuclear stockpile on the face of the earth in Pakistan. We want to be able to leap on that stockpile and stabilize it if necessary. And the third reason we're there is because there are 20 million Uyghurs, and if the CIA has to mount an operation using those Uyghurs, as Erdogan has done in Turkey against Assad, there are 20,000 of them in Idlib in Syria right now, for example. That's why the Chinese might be deploying military forces to Syria in the very near future to take care of those Uyghurs that Erdogan invited in. Well, the CIA would want to destabilize China, and that would be the best way to do it, to foment unrest and to join with those Uyghurs in pushing the Han Chinese and Beijing from internal places rather than external.
Unfortunately for the US, their plan to separate China is failing. All 56 ethnic groups in China will love and support each other. We unite and hold on to each other like pomegranate seeds. And we will unite with the rest of the world to build a community with a shared future for all mankind.
So, folks, they are together like the pomegranate seeds. And what do we think of that? Well, we don't know about that, but we do think it's pretty scurrilous for the United States to be fomenting conflict inside, of Xinjiang to break up the pomegranate seeds there. After all, what we're talking about is peaceful development. We're talking about progress. We're talking about improving a lot of the people, of Central Asia. So, there's the text. Well, here's a quote, from the video. I could have read all this, but I thought, it was better to show the video. I also quoted, of course, this statement from Li Jinling, before I began to play the video. So what happened here? I hit the wrong thing. So going back to the piece. Yeah, I guess I'm at the right place now. And this is a headline from the Times of Israel. Uyghur militants in Syria look to Zionism as model for their homeland. God protect us all. China has cracked down on the ethnic group accusing members of terrorism. Many have now joined jihadists in the Middle East to train themselves for war with Beijing. This piece is that we're talking about here, that's quoted by Mike Whitney, is from Jerry Shee. Bottom line, says Mike, the Uyghur genocide is a human rights hoax that has been concocted in order to justify future hostilities against the PCR, which of course is the People's Republic of China. In a recent article, editor Ron Unz exposed this sham and said, for several years, this quote, several years, our government and our mainstream media have heavily promoted claims of a Chinese genocide of the Uyghurs of Xinjiang, supposedly drawing upon secretive intelligence sources that I found very dubious. After watching these 4 hours of personal travel footage, I consider those incendiary claims as totally preposterous as anything I've ever heard. And then there's a link to the article by Ron Unz in the review, which is also where this article from Mike Whitney is from. Mike says, here's more from Unz, quote, top officials of the Trump administration declared that China was committing, quote, genocide, unquote, against its Muslim Uyghur population of Xinjiang province, with the New York Times and other leading media outlets endorsing and heavily amplifying those explosive accusations. I regularly ridicule those accusations, emphasizing that they seem based upon no solid evidence, and greatly reminded me of the false claims of Saddam's WMD that had been used to launch our ill-fated Iraq war. What made these accusations about Xinjiang seem so totally absurd was that the huge province was completely open to both Chinese and foreign tourists, who regularly traveled there in large numbers, attracted by its scenic vistas and interesting Muslim Turkic culture. The notion that China was committing a, quote, genocide, unquote, in a region constantly crisscrossed by tourists seemed like the most mindless sort of propaganda aimed at the gullible and the dim-witted. This is from Propaganda Hoaxes versus Chinese Reality, a piece by Ron Unz in the Unz Review. So here's another map showing Japan on one side and locating Miyagi and Tokyo in Japan. And there's the Uyghur Autonomous Region in Xinjiang. You see how large it is. And it's fairly autonomous. You see Beijing up there, and another center of Chinese population in Shandong province here, and the rest of China, okay, on this map. So you can see the Uyghur autonomous region is absolutely huge. It looks like it's roughly 1/8 of China or 1/7 of China. It's a huge piece of territory. Has far more area than Japan, for example, or Shandong province. Occupies a considerable part of China. So, going on here, Hun's view of the Uyghur genocide is further reinforced by the group's suspicious relationship to the CIA, which suggests that the militants have been groomed for carrying out Washington's geopolitical agenda. Check out this excerpt from an article in Global Research. The Turkestan Islamic Party, TIC, a terrorist organization, was founded by Uyghur jihadists in
Mhm.
1988. Just as separate uprisings, hey D, what is that?
Okay, let me turn my mute on.
Okay. Just as separatist uprisings were breaking out in Xinjiang province, northwestern China, the Turkestan Islamic Party, previously known as East Turkestan Islamic Movement, received CIA sponsorship from its early existence. In contradictory fashion, the Turkestan Islamic Party, which is based largely in northwestern Pakistan, is deemed a terrorist organization by the United States, along with other major countries like Russia and, of course, China and its neighbor Pakistan. By 2001, militant Uyghurs were preparing for guerrilla warfare in the same camp situated in Afghanistan with the CIA and ISI. Pakistan's intelligence service has once provided training to Mujahideen extremists in order to hamper Soviet troops embedded in Afghanistan 40 years ago. Between 1990 and 2001, the Turkestan Islamic Party perpetrated over 200 terrorist acts, including blowing up vehicles, marketplaces, and assassinating Chinese government officials. High-profile Uyghur separatists like the Xinjiang-born Anwar Yusuf Turani, founder of the East Turkestan government in exile, is himself living in the state of Virginia. So almost a neighbor of mine then. On America's East Coast, Turani has been a willing tool in Washington's power game with China. In June 1999, he met with President Bill Clinton and asked him to back political movements seeking independence for Xinjiang. And Turani later enjoyed dialogue with Clinton's successor, George W. Bush, who promised to support the, quote, fundamental human rights, unquote, of, quote, Uyghurs and others living in China, unquote. Further prominent Uyghur exiles living in America have called for Xinjiang's independence from China, such as Rabia Kadir, a five-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, born in Xinjiang, and who also resides in the U.S. state of Virginia. For 11 years, until November 2017, she was the leader of the World Uyghur Congress, headquartered in Munich, which is partly funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. The NED, partly subsidized by the United States Congress, and I believe also sometimes at least, maybe still, subsidized by the Soros Foundation, has a long history of, quote, soft power, unquote, interference in sovereign states around the world. China, Nicaragua, the Ukraine, and so on. I should correct, I said the Soros Foundation. I think the actual name of it is the Open Society Foundation. The World Uyghur Congress was established in April 2004 by Erkan Alpert, I guess it's Alptekan, a former advisor to the CIA. This is from 70 years, this quote was from 70 years of U.S. destabilization in China, U.S.-sponsored Uyghur insurgency in Xinjiang, And the report, okay, is from Global Research. Was that quote again another one from Graham Fuller? Such a long quote. So this was evidently an article by Ron Unz in Global Research. Very interesting article, to say the least. So a number of Uyghur separatists are living, quote, living in Virginia, unquote, as guests of the CIA. And we are expected to believe that Washington's only interest is human rights? Nonsense. The U.S. is obviously arming, training, and funding another vicious terrorist organization it intends to use to inflict a, quote, strategic defeat, unquote, on China, the same as it is doing to Russia and Ukraine. This is from an article at the Asian Times, quote, the rapid collapse of the Syrian Arab army in the face of the advance of Turkish-backed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has drawn attention to the foreign fighters within their ranks. First and foremost among those foreign fighters are the Uyghurs from China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. They used to fight China as part of the East Turkestan Islamic movement, but rebranded as the Turkestan Islamic Party some years back. Regardless of whichever name they go by, the organization has a history of collaborating with terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda, in support of the quest to carve out a Uyghur state from China. That's why it was designated as a terrorist group by the UN Security Council. Members of the group just released a video from Syria calling for militant jihad against China. Yang Xiaodong contributed a detailed Asia Times piece on this subject under the title, quote, China's cause to be terrified of rebel-run Syria, unquote. That's very funny. I find it very funny. Two of the most important points are that the Turkestan Islamic Party is recruiting members from Central Asia, and that it could reestablish itself in Afghanistan to carry out attacks against the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The corridor is considered to be the Belt and Road Initiative's flagship project, and for years it has been the target of attacks by the Balochistan Liberation Army. How many folks do you think have heard about the Balochistan liberation?
I don't think many.
Not too many. It's the Balochs from Balochistan, which is a place, of course, I think it's a place in Pakistan. Anyway, the Turkestan Islamic Party could reestablish itself in Afghanistan. It could attack the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It can't be ruled out that the Turkestan Islamic Party might opportunistically want to hit China's soft spot. Beyond attacking Pakistani-based Belt and Road projects, such opportunistic motivation could also find relevance in Central Asia. There are Uyghur communities in Kazakhstan and in perennially unstable Kyrgyzstan. Oh, these stans. All these stans, from which the Turkestan Islamic Party could find recruits, whether to carry out attacks against Belt and Road projects there or in Pakistan. Another factor for observers to keep in mind is the role of Ukraine's GUR military intelligence agency. The Washington Post reported that GUR played a role in HTS's blitz across Syria. Nevertheless, the contemporary GUR is also a CIA project, as the Washington Post reported in late 2023. This is all a very long quote, by the way, from the Asia Times. One person who used to write for the Asia Times was Pepe Escobar, but I no longer think he does. The possibility thus arises of the CIA using GUR as a plausibly deniable proxy for managing, or at least encouraging, the Turkestan Islamic Party's expansion to the geostrategic Central Asian region between Russia and China. This is from Uyghur separatist threat could reach beyond China's Xinjiang. Really very illuminating, I think. I better make this a little smaller because it's getting to be hard to read. Here we are, down to 110%. Mike Whitney goes on. The almost total lack of any positive courage of China and the British media further closes off the scope even for making arguments that policy should reflect opportunities from dealing with China. The Overton window on China policy does not allow for positive coverage of the country at the moment. Others have commented on this. For example, Daniel Bell said, God, I haven't heard anybody quoting from Daniel Bell for ages and ages and ages. I'm not even sure Daniel Bell's alive anymore. Quote, there is almost universal consensus in the West that China is led by an evil government that is bad to its own people and dangerous to people in other countries. It's extremely difficult to publish views that argue otherwise, unquote. And continued, quote, public opinion makes it almost impossible to publish comments that offer a balanced picture of Chinese politics in leading Western media outlets, unquote. In the current political climate, this looks unlikely to change. As discussed at the start of this paper, the important lesson is for responsible politicians and policymakers to realize that the picture of China they're getting from the media is an inaccurate and incomplete one. In short, the media coverage and the wider public debate about China and the UK today fail to reflect the complex reality of China and close off space for in-depth understanding or balanced debate about this most significant of countries. Of course, this is exactly what's happening. The CIA is directly involved in hybrid war on China that will include the destruction of soft targets that are essential to complete Beijing's massive infrastructure project. And what other choice does Washington have? Like Israel, Washington cannot preserve its privileged place in the world order by competing on a level playing field with China that has already overtaken the U.S. in nearly every area of commerce, science, and technology. The only way the U.S. can maintain its tenuous grip on power is obliterating anything that threatens its global dominance, and then embracing and convincing the world that it's just fighting for human rights. Here's more from the Times of Israel. Interesting. Quote from the Times of Israel, quote, Uyghur militants have killed hundreds, if not thousands, in attacks inside China in a decades-long insurgency that initially targeted police and other symbols of Chinese authority, but in recent years also included civilians. Extremists with knives killed 33 people at a train station in 2014. Abroad, they bombed the Chinese embassy in Kyrgyzstan in September last year, and in 2014 they killed 25 people in an attack on a Thai shrine popular with Chinese tourists. China's just like the West, its officials say. The country is a victim of terror, and Uyghur men are pulled by global jihadi ideology rather than driven by grievances at home. Sayed Tomturk, a Uyghur activist in Turkey, who often speaks to fighters in Syria, said it was impossible for Uyghur militants to liberate Xinjiang, but he said Chinese President Xi Jinping's ambitious project to develop railway lines, ports, and other infrastructures linking various regions to China makes Beijing vulnerable to militant attacks abroad. The Islamic State took credit for kidnapping and killing 2 Chinese teachers in Pakistan's Baluchistan province, which is a cornerstone of Beijing's so-called Belt and Road Initiative project. Chinese officials and Western analysts alike say that the Uyghurs' experience in the Syrian jihadi melting pot will likely exacerbate violence against soft targets, quote-unquote soft targets, outside China. China's foreign ministry called the Turkestan Islamic Party a security threat for the Middle East. Uyghur militants in Syria look to Zionism as a model for their homeland. That's from the Times of Israel. So let me enlarge the type of this a little bit now, because again, it's getting very small. So according to the Times of Israel, the Turkestan Islamic Party, TIP, is a ruthless group of bloodthirsty mercenaries who are motivated more by, quote, global jihadi ideology rather than driven by grievances at home, unquote. This is the organization the U.S. has decided to bring back in its quest to destabilize China. And notice that the authors of the Times article have drawn the same conclusion as the author of the Asian Times piece, that the Uyghurs' MO will be to attack soft targets that will impact critical infrastructure in order to isolate China from the West, while U.S. military bases and Pacific alliances tighten the noose on China's maritime trade. And what targets will these Asian jihadis choose? Sorry, this is getting too large here. Some analysts, like Andrew Koripko, think that they will, quote, carry out attacks against the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is considered to be the Belt and Road Initiative's flagship project. That quote was from the Asian Times. But IMHO, that is in my humble opinion, says Mike Whitney, I think Washington will attack critical nodes on the China-Europe freight train CEFT system. Keep in mind, the United States remains fully committed to preventing the reemergence of a rival in a region it considers vital to its national security, Central Asia. So logically, we should expect that it will take extraordinary steps to separate China from Europe and thus lay the groundwork for economic strangulation. Here's more from the European Financial Review. I gotta say, reading this, the first thing I think of in reading this is, for God's sake, you want to have a collaborative foreign policy that plays nice in the sandbox, okay, with other nations, and which doesn't get us into risks of nuclear war. The first thing you need to do is defund the CIA. I mean, really, this is ridiculous. This stuff is ridiculous. China's Belt and Road Initiative will officially be 10 years old in 2023. This is a quote from the European Financial Review. A crucial precursor to the BRI, and arguably its most prominent flagship project, the China-Europe Freight Train, CEFT, has already run through its first decade of 2011-2021, with 82 routes currently connecting nearly 100 Chinese cities to around 200 cities across 24 European countries and more than a dozen Central, East, and Southeast Asian countries. The CEFT has formed a vast transcontinental freight system spanning both ends of Eurasia, while only 17 freight trains ran from China to Europe in the CEFT's inaugural year of 2011. 60,000 trains cumulatively will have traversed the Eurasian landmass and its maritime margins by October 16, 2022, when the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party opens in Beijing. As the CEFT enters its second decade poised for continued growth, a critical question looms. Is Russia's war against China disrupting the CEFT, and how? On the one hand, the CEFT has depended heavily on Russia as both the most important terminus and through corridor, accounting for 37% of all CEFTs through 2021, leading Germany at 24.3% and Poland at 23.4%. On the other hand, the CEFT is anchored to a vast network of major and minor cities with grounded flexibility and resilience to weather the Ukraine storm. Russia's invasion in February 2022 threw a big geopolitical wrench into the CEFT-enabled Eurasian freight network. A destruction appears major, as the war is the biggest conflict in Europe in 8 decades, with severe geopolitical consequences. Some disruption might arise as European companies avoid using the Russian railway, fearing economic sanctions. As the war in Ukraine keeps geopolitical tensions high, the extensive city-based CEFT network has acquired sufficient resilience from its continued expansion, improved infrastructure, and operational adaptability. These qualities may ensure the CEFT sustainability as a Eurasia-wide freight system. Eurasia's freight infrastructure versus Russia's war in Ukraine. Chicago Council on Global Affairs. That was the origin of the previous quote. Here's a graphic, China-Europe freight train routes. You can see how broadly dispersed, they are, how many important cities they hit, and how far into China they go. It's really quite astonishing. And goes as far west, as Prague. There's Budapest and Warsaw and Minsk and Moscow. But of course, the Ukraine routes have been rather severed since the war. Once those routes are restored, that area is going to boom. While economic sanctions in Russia, I guess I'll expand that a little bit. While economic sanctions in Russia have reduced freight traffic along the northern route by roughly 50%, the makeshift block in the Red Sea by the Houthis has dramatically impacted shipping through the Suez Canal. These growing threats to global security have shifted traffic to the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, which is a trade route from the Black Sea and the Caucasus to the Central Asian steppe. This so-called middle corridor, which, quote, follows the route of the ancient Silk Road, unquote, offers a viable alternative to the northern route, but also faces its own security and infrastructure challenges. Regrettably, we think U.S. foreign policy strategists will focus on this middle corridor as a prime choke point for disrupting China's freight service to Europe. Once again, the U.S. cannot prevail in its war against China unless it is able to weaken the country via sanctions, isolation, and persistent proxy warfare. Washington is positioning itself to either block or sabotage China's trade flows to Europe, just like it sabotaged the flow of Russian gas to Europe. We believe that Uyghur jihadists will be used to help conduct these operations. We also think that Washington will use any overreaction by Beijing as an excuse to deploy the U.S. Navy to block energy shipments to China, thereby preventing the country from accessing the resources it needs to heat its homes and fuel its industries. China imports over 70% of its oil, which makes it vulnerable to hostile interdiction. The U.S. used the same strategy against Japan just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, so it fully understands the implication of its actions. I'm not sure I would agree with that, because that requires people who remember what the U.S. did before World War II. But okay, I'm sure there are some people who remember that. Bottom line, Western elites have already decided that they will do, quote, whatever it takes, unquote, to preserve America's global primacy. And if that means nuclear war, then so be it. By the way, folks, do all the rest of us feel that way? Do we all feel that way? That we want to do whatever it takes to maintain the global primacy of the U.S.? And if that means nuclear war, then so be it? I'm afraid I, for one, do not share that particular view. I think this stuff is all criminal. It's breaking of international law once again. It needs to be stopped. The American intelligence agencies sponsoring it need to be defunded. If Trump wants to go after the deep state, that's the part of the deep state he ought to go after. If he really wants peace, that's what he needs to go after, because that stuff is absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous. Okay, Dee, let's go over comments.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm happy to see Kay's here and so many other people are here.
Yes.
Hello, Kay.
I think our Twitter folks are gone tonight, though.
You know something? I didn't get over there. Well, it's just not me sharing it out there, but it's just me adding an additional. You're adding an additional share. I didn't get over there. Maybe if I do an additional share, we'll get people on.
Okay, there. Okay, I don't think. Well, I don't know. It may just be Christmas Eve, and so we're only getting people who are on Facebook, okay, and YouTube. Okay, our usual people. Anyway, I do want to say Merry Christmas and or Happy Holidays to everybody. And Alana says, thank you for saying so. I was a little nervous. I thought you did a great job, Lana. I thought that Dave also did a great job.
Yeah, I thought it was great too.
Yeah, in general, I thought that the presentation of the slides, okay, were very good, but I would like to suggest some factual improvements, especially with respect to the fatalities, 44,789. I know exactly where that came from, that figure came from. It came from a study done in 2009 by Himmelstein, Woolhandler, okay, and Wilper, and they were quoting a study that they did in 2005, and the estimate of 45,000 fatalities per year is from 2005. It's almost 20 years old. There's been a lot of difference in fatalities since then, both in the fatalities shooting up, then going down a little, and then shooting up some more since Trump took office. And I have no idea what they are now. It wouldn't surprise me to find that fatalities now are somewhere close to 100,000. We could get a pretty good estimate of them, but what you have to do is you have to go to the Census Bureau and find out what the number of uninsured was. You could at least get 2020 estimates of what the number of uninsured were, inside of the United States. Then there's a fatality figure, sort of a ratio, an odds ratio, that comes from a number of studies that I aggregated in the article from my website, that indicates that 1 out of 781 of the uninsured is going to die in any particular year. So you take the number of uninsured and you divide it by 781, and you get the number of fatalities in a particular year. I bet it would be very, very substantial, but you have to find the latest census data on this, or protection by the prediction by the Census Bureau. I should say projection by the Census Bureau of what the number of insured are in 2024. Anyway, Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Earl. Lana says, hi, Steve and Earl. Lana says, I share it to FB. And Steve says, hi, Lana. Lana says, I saw a LinkedIn post that China was planning to sell a pile of new bonds to finance this. That may be, I ask, quote, why do they need to sell bonds if they are sovereign over their currency? I think you asked a good question. I don't think they have to sell a pile of bonds to finance this at all. I think they're sovereign over their own currency. They can simply create the money they need. Or another thing they could do is sell a pile of U.S. bonds in order to finance it. Lana says, so far no one replied. Yeah, they don't have any answer to that. Steve says, I'm alone. It's nice to have some company. Steve Wolfbrand says, I didn't know that China sells bonds. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they do sell internal bonds. They issue bonds, sell bonds. Earl Lurie says, that's Steve Wolfbrand. So a string walks into a bar. Bartender says, we don't serve strings, you gotta go. String goes outside and has a fit like an epileptic and goes back in the bar. Earl Lurie says, that's Steve Wolfbrand. Bartender says, didn't I tell you we don't serve strings? String says, I'm afraid not. Well, that's a pun, son. Earl, a Chinese couple, had a black baby. They named him something wrong. I think we may be getting into some weird jokes here. And Evelina says, Al-Golani promised to gift the Uyghurs Syrian citizenship. So they're going to go back to China as Syrian citizens, and they're going to fight against the Chinese as Syrian citizens. Evelina says, Earl Lurie says, U.S. loves to stir shit up. Nice country you have there. Shame if something happened to it. Evelina says, needless to say, many Syrians are not happy with this. Monica Augustine says, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Monica. I have a question. Should we start saying Happy Christmas here instead of Merry Christmas? It's really not the same, because when you say Merry Christmas, you're saying to people be merry this Christmas or experience being merry.
Hmm.
Whereas the British who say Happy Christmas are saying be happy this Christmas. Isn't it better to be happy rather than simply merry?
Yes.
I think it is. So maybe the UKers have something. Steve Wolfbrand says, wife says, quote, that's not a pig, that's a goat. A man says, quote, I wasn't talking to you, unquote. Oh, that is really bad. Really bad. And Steve says, Merry Christmas, Monica. Kay says, hi all. Hiya, Kay. Steve Wolfbrand says, we're not even allowed to see Chinese EVs, which are selling all over the world. Yeah, and they're selling, what are they selling for? $4,900. We're not allowed to buy $4,900 electric cars. I mean, it would be one thing if we were trying to protect a thriving EV industry, but the only real EV cars we have here right now are Teslas. I mean, what else do you see except Teslas? So what we're trying to do is to protect Tesla? Come on. He has enough money. Earl Lurie says, K. Ryan, hi, K. Steve Will says, hi, K. Merry Christmas. Kay says, hi, Earl. Hi, Steve. Merry Christmas. Kay says, hi, Dolores. And Lana says, thank
Hello.
Dulles. Thank Alan Dulles, that a-hole for the CIA. We should, Lana, such language. For the CIA says we should probably blame Truman and Eisenhower while we are at it. Evil organization it is. Well, the CIA, as the CIA, dates from Truman. In the World War II, it was the Office of Strategic Services. But that wasn't the same as the CIA. It didn't have the same scope and the same authority. So it was created by Truman. Truman was afraid of it before he was through. And I think, was kind of advocating for its end. Kay Ryan says, ho, Joe. KK. Lana says, how are you, Kay? Please all remember to hit the like button and share. Kay says, okay, I guess. Steve Wolfbrand says, share it on Facebook. Evelina says, how will China secure these routes given CIA-funded Uyghur jihadists on the loose? Well, I don't know. I guess China and the other governments involved are going to have to root out the Uyghurs through armed force, in their areas. And maybe China can secure those routes by having a new security framework, working out a new security framework with Trump. We're trying to do it anyway. Maybe the effort can be started, by Vlad, because Vlad is used to have a relationship with the Donald. So maybe Vlad can start the process off. Maybe together they can make some kind of deal with Trump to leash up the CIA and prevent them from funding Uyghurs or any other separatists. Lana says, no, I do not want, quote, whatever it takes. Time to bow out gracefully, but the powers that be don't care what I want. They don't care what you want either, Lana. But I care what you want, and you care what I want. And maybe we can develop that dump the corruption movement eventually and elect people who do care what we want. Steve Wolfbrand says Trump's want peace. He invited the Chinese leader to his inauguration. Good point. If Xi Jinping comes to his to the inauguration, maybe he can start talking to Trump about leashing up the CIA. Kay says, so disappointed in our last election. Me too. Okay. My next door neighbor just brought me a plate of tamales. LA Christmas. I think that's a good offering, Steve, a good offering. Lana says, did I hear the CEO or head of Ford drives a Chinese EV? Yes, I heard that too. I heard the head of Ford didn't want to give up the car. He liked it so much. Lana says, I can't stand, okay, the Dulles brothers, either one of them. No, I couldn't stand them either. Lana says, wow, Steve, of course, now they're both dead, as we know. Anyway, Dee, would you like to read the next piece? It is another one from Alistair Crook. So
Okay, let me see.
it's
Okay.
going to be enormously interesting. I can share it for you if you like.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Here it is.
Okay, the quote kingmakers pull the plug from Syria. Yet again, a quote Greek tragedy begins. And this is, yeah, as you said, Alistair Cook, December 23rd.
Yes, Alistair Crook is a former diplomat from Britain who lives in Italy now, and who was representing Britain in the Middle East for a very long time, and he's extremely well connected throughout the whole Middle East, from Turkey to Iran. He has contacts everywhere. Please go on, Dee.
Okay, Syria has been disintegrated and pillaged into the name of, quote, liberating Syrians from the threat of ISIS, which they, Washington, had installed in the first place.
Yeah,
Crazy, right?
crazy, indeed.
James Jeffrey, former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and Turkey, in a March 2021 interview with PBS Frontline, laid out very plainly the template for what has just happened in Syria this month. Syria, given its size, its strategic location, its historical importance, is the pivot point for which there can be an American managed security system in the region. And so you've got this general alliance that is locked in with us, but the stress point is greatest in Syria. Jeffrey explained in the 2021 interview why the U.S. shifted its to support to Julani and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, IITS. Quote, we got Mike Pompeo to issue a waiver to allow us to give aid to HTS. I received and sent messages to HTS. The message comes back from HTS were, we, HTS, want to be your friend. We're not terrorists. We're just fighting Assad.
Ho, ho. That's
Mm,
rich.
yes, it is. The PBS Frontline interviewer asked, the U.S. was supporting indirectly the armed opposition, to which Jeffrey responds, quote, it was important to us that HTS not disintegrate. Our policy was to leave HTS alone. And the fact that we haven't targeted HTS ever, the fact that we have never raised our voice to the Turks about their cohabitation with them.
Cohabitation.
Yep.
That's rich.
Yep. In fact, I used this example the last time I was talking to very senior Turks when they started bitching about the relationship we, the US, have with the SDF in eastern Syria. I said to them, look, Turkey has always maintained that you want us in northeast Syria, which they do, but you don't understand. We can't be in uh, northeast Syria without the platform because we only have hundreds of troops there. I said, it's just like you in Idlib. We want you to be in Idlib, but you can't be in Idlib without having a platform. And the platform is largely HTS. Now, unlike the SDF, HTS,
The comment here, the SDF is the Syrian Democratic uh, Front, and that's the Kurds.
okay,
Okay,
it,
so they're really the only group in Syria, that's really democratic in terms of its internal organization. Okay,
HT, okay, HTS is a UN designated official terrorist organization. Have I ever or has any American official ever complained to you about what you're doing there with HTS? No. David Miller, a British academic, has noted that in 2015, prominent Syrian Sunni Muslim scholar Sheikh al Yahabi, who is anti Assad, was unconvinced by Jelani's efforts to rebrand al Qaeda as Jabhat al Nusra. Jelani, in his al 2013 Al Jazeera interview, twice confirmed his allegiance to al Qaeda, saying that he received orders from its leader, Dr. Ayman al Zawahiri,
yes.
and those were to not target the West. He confirmed his own position as being that of hardline intolerance toward those who practiced a uh, heretical Islam.
Okay, of course, the heretical Islam to them is the normal Islam that people practice in the world.
Hmm.
Okay, today, but the Wahhabis, the kind of Islam practiced uh, 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 by Al Qaeda, uh, that kind of Islam is the kind of Islam devoted to chopping off people's heads, okay, that they don't agree with. Okay, so that's their form of Islam, and they're calling everybody else the heretics.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm. Miller comments, quote, while ISIS put on suits, allowed Syria to be carved up by the U.S., preach peace with the Zionist state, want free markets, and cut gas deals with their regional patrons, they're true believers in the Sunni identitarian diaspora haven't yet clocked that they've been sold out, as was the plan, always the plan. In private, the planners of this war in NATO states laugh about sending young Salafi cannon fodder from around the world into a meat grinder. The $2,000 salaries are a mere speck of sand compared to the gas and construction wealth that is expected to be turned to Turkish, Qatari, Israeli, and American coffers. They killed Palestine for this, and they've spent the next 30 years justifying it. Right, and they'll spend the next 30 years justifying it based on whatever line the very expensive PR firms hired by the NATO and Gulf states shill to them. The Syrian regime change operation is the rug pull of the century.
I think that statement from David Miller is very, very insightful.
Yes, it is.
I mean, really puts the truth out there, on the line for people to see. Please
Of
go ahead.
course, of course, James Jeffrey account was nothing new. Between 1979 and 1992, the CIA spent billions of dollars funding arming and training Afghan mujahideen militia like Osama bin Laden in an attempt to bleed the USSR dry by pulling it into a quagmire. It was from the ranks of the mujahideen that Al Qaeda emerged.
Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Exactly what happened. This goes way back to 1979.
hmm And yet, by the 2010s, even as the US was ostensibly at war with Al Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was secretly working with it in Syria on a plan to overthrow Assad. The CIA spent around $1 billion per year training and arming a wide network of rebel groups to this end. As Jake Sullivan told Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in a leaked 2012 email, Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria, as Alan McLeod observes in Consortium News. Turkish press accounts largely confirm this Jeffrey scenario was the current game plan. Omar Anyan, a former senior ambassador and deputy undersecretary in charge of Middle East and Asia at the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, writes that the operation to overthrow Assad's regime in Syria was meticulously planned for over a year, with a coordinated involvement from Turkey, the United States, and several other nations. Through various statements, it has become clear that Assad's departure resulted from an intricate web of agreements between virtually all stakeholders, whilst HTS is actively working to rebrand itself. This transformation remains to be proven. The HTS story has precedent. In the summer following Israel's 2006 unsuccessful war on Hezbollah, Dick Cheney sat in his office loudly bemoaning Hezbollah's continuing strength. And worse still, that it seemed to him that Iran had been the primary beneficiary from the U.S. 2003 Iraq War.
Yeah, I think that was insightful for Cheney to realize that.
hmm
I mean, we fight this big war, and who's the beneficiary for it? Iran.
Iran. Yep.
Well,
Cheney's.
fellas,
Yep. Cheney's guest, the then Saudi intelligence chief Prince Bandar, vigorously concurred, as chronicled by John Hanna, who participated in the meeting. And to general surprise, Prince Bandar proclaimed that Iran yet could be cut to size. Syria was the weak link that could be collapsed via an Islamist insurgency. Cheney's initial skepticism turned to elation as Bandar said that the U.S. involvement might be unnecessary. He, Bandar, would orchestrate and manage the project. Leave it to me, he said. Banda separately told John Hanna. Excuse me, gone too far.
oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. Leave it to me, he said. Banda separately told John Hanna. The king knows that other than the collapse of the Islamic Republic itself, nothing would weaken Iran more than losing Syria.
Okay, it's really amazing that they hatched this so early
Yeah,
in time, and that they kept pursuing the same policy now for 20 years.
yeah. One administration to the next, the same
One
policy.
administration to the next, the same disgusting thing,
Yeah.
spending more and more and more money. Uh, why? Just so they could get Assad out of there, And you know what? That's not going to succeed, because they are going to find some other paths in
hmm
order to resupply the war in Lebanon. Hezbollah. They are not through with their attacks on Israel, and Israel is still not in a good position to survive it. Okay, please go on.
Okay. So Jeffrey was simply reiterating.
I think it's well that first effort.
Oh,
See,
okay. Well, that first effort did not succeed. It led to bloody civil war, but ultimately President Assad's government survived. So Jeffrey was simply reiterating uh, in 202.
okay, I think that was probably 2022.
Yeah, 2020. Okay, its sequel. The original Wahhabi-led rug pull on Syria by the Gulf was simply to be reversed engineered into an HTS hit by a rebranded amalgam of various militia made up of primarily of former fighters, many not Syrian, from Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, and ISIS, directed in this second iteration by Turkish intelligence and financed by Qatar.
Yeah, all those. Uh, uh, okay, I think the Qataris are so involved in double dealing.
They are.
They're just, I
Yeah.
mean, they just can't be trusted.
No. Syria thus has been disintegrated and pillaged in the name of liberating Syrians from the threat of ISIS, which they, Washington, had installed in the first place, and which the U.S. then used to justify the northeast of Syria's occupation by U.S. forces. In the same mode, the unspoken part of this plan is to make secular Syria, with its legal system taken from France, Islamic. We will implement Islamic law to justify the Israeli attacks and land grabs, which are being presented as defensive measures against jihadists.
I think that's another tremendously insightful statement about what's going on there.
Yeah,
And that's one thing we have to understand. They're trying to get rid of secular Syria.
yeah,
Okay, and why? Because they're trying to justify Israeli attacks and land grabs.
yeah, it's sick.
God, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, so they're going to slaughter a bunch of people. And they're telling people to go back.
Yeah, and they'll have nothing to go back to.
Right. Go back there and get slaughtered. Of course, it is correct that there is likely money to be made from these events. It was never proven, but seismic surveys before the first Syria war in 2011 seemed to show that there may well be substrata deposits of oil or gas in Syria, beyond the relatively small fields in the northeast. And yes, reconstruction will be a bonanza for Turkey's languishing construction sector.
Yes, it may be a bonanza, but where are they going to get the money?
Yeah.
Is it going to be financed by the United States? And the bonanza will be for Turkey's rich people who own the construction center?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Who knows? Syria's ailing military was no direct military threat to Israel, per se. So you may wonder, why are they tearing the place apart? Israel's goal here is to basically wreck Syria, Professor Mearsheimer opines. It's not in large part because of it's not in large part because of Israel. By the way, I think the Americans and the Turks played a much more important role than Israel did in wrecking Syria. The country is wrecked, and I don't know anybody who thinks that the rebels who are now in control in Damascus are going to be able to restore order in that country. From Israel's point of view, this is a perfectly fine situation, Mearsheimer adds.
Yes.
U.S. anti-Russia hawks also hope that Russia might take the bait of a wrecked Syria to get and mired into a widening Middle East quagmire. All of which takes us directly back to Jeffrey's statement. Syria, given its size, its strategic location, its historical importance, is the pivot point for whether there can be an American managed security system in the region. Syria has been from the outset, from 1949, the balancer to Israel in the region. That is now over, leaving only Iran to balance the Israeli thrust to a greater Israel. It is no surprise, then, that the Israelis are agitating for the Americans to join with them in another orgy of destruction, this time to be visited on Iran. Oh, yeah, they're talking and talking and talking about it.
They're talking and talking about it now, especially in the circles of people who were joining the Trump administration.
Oh, I know. It's scary. My
Trump
stomach turns from it.
isn't talking about it so much, but Marco Rubio, Sebastian Gorka, all of those people who were the heir apparents uh, to Sullivan and Blinken, they're all talking about a war on Iran.
They're sick.
Yeah, sick. I mean, they've been wanting a war on Iran since the days of John McCain.
I know. It's crazy.
Bomb, 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 bomb Iran.
I know. It's nuts.
But I'm afraid they're going to get bomb, 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 bomb from Iran.
Yeah. Okay. And did Russia have foreknowledge of what was afoot in Idlib and the orchestration of a transition of power? Of course. The very effective Russian services must have known, as this Syria project has been ongoing since the mid-70s, through the Hudson Institute and Senator Scoop Jackson.
There they are again. Scoop
Yeah.
Jackson.
Assad had been signaling over the last 4 years his desperate plan with Saudi, UAE, and Egypt to move towards a pro-Israeli, pro-Western stance in the hope of normalizing with Washington and thereby gaining some sanctions relief. Assad's ploy failed, and Syria likely will emerge as, quote, Greek tragedy, whereby tragedy evolves as actors play out their own natures. Quiescent ethnic and sectarian tensions likely will rekindle. Wildfires will catch. The lid is off, and Russia was never going to take the bait of plunging in. The U.S.-Israeli alliance has long wanted Syria, and now they have got it. Any concomitant mayhem is down to them.
And
Yes,
down to us, yes.
yep, yes, the U.S., in theory, may applaud itself for achieving more of an American managed security and energy dominant flow system. And that's about it. It's always about the resources.
It's always about that, but the really ironic part of it is to manage that sort of energy or the dominant flow of that sort of energy, okay, is uh, to ensure the destruction of humankind,
Yeah, and they don't care.
because we have to get rid of that sort of energy as soon as we possibly can. So all this effort, is being put in to manage the flow of energy from sources that are going to kill us all. What we really have to do is to abandon those sources of energy.
Hmm. But the U.S. ruling strata, however, we're never going to let Europe be energy independent. The U.S. needs West Asia's energy assets for itself to collateralize its debt overload. European states are left to tumble as the fiscal crunch bites and European growth tails away.
So here again, we have the problem of people who specialize in foreign affairs, security experts, uh, 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 trying to opine on the nature, okay, of debt. In other words, they believe the myths that we cannot handle, our debt, because they don't understand what it means to be a monetarily sovereign country.
Hmm.
They have all kinds of false ideas about the nature of debt, and they believe uh, that the reason why we've been so dominant is because we have the reserve currency, okay, in international trade. And they think that's why we've been able to handle our large debt. That's a fallacy. We've been able to handle our large debt, okay, in this country uh, 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 because we are, okay, a monetary sovereign. So the level of our debt does not matter for fiscal sustainability. It literally does not matter. Not how high the debt is, not how high the debt, okay, to GDP ratio is. Neither of these things matter. They have zero significance. And these theorists in international policy all believe, okay, that the level of our debt actually matters, and that it is why we need the energy assets of Asia for ourselves. The truth of the matter is, we don't need these assets, for ourselves, because we don't have to collateralize, okay, our currency. Our currency is a fiat currency. It's unbacked. Uh, it floats freely, okay, in international trade that we created ourselves, and it needs no backing other than the confidence of the people of the United States in the currency. And that confidence is bolstered by the fact that people need that currency, the dollar, to pay our taxes. And as long as those taxes are driving the value of the currency, there isn't going to be any way to get around the importance of that currency. And there isn't going to be any way to get around the idea that we can create the currency ourselves whenever we need more funds. Our collateral is our people, okay, and our economy here. And that is all we need. We do not need oil. But by the way, we have plenty of oil ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have no shortage of oil, for our own needs. It might be more expensive to refine that oil or stuff like that. But of course, the government can pay the cost for that. There's absolutely no problems. Okay, please go on.
Okay. Others may see a collateral scenario that that a conflicted and possible re-radicalized Middle East will inflict further strain onto the already livid domestic social tensions in Europe. Israel, nonetheless, is relishing its win. Winning what? Former IDF Chief of Staff and Defense Minister Bogi Ya'alon puts it this way: the current Israeli government's path is to conquer, annex, commit ethnic cleansing, and to establish Jewish settlements. Polls show some 70% of Israelis, sometimes more, support this and for Israel to be a liberal democracy. Okay, that's kind of weird.
It is weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a strange statement completely.
Yes.
This contradictory path will lead us to destruction, he concludes.
So he thought it was strange also.
Yes. What others can be the final end to this Zionist project. There are more than 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea. Are they wait,
I'm sorry.
I didn't finish the yeah. Are they all to vanish from the map? Well, if the far right has it
Yeah,
as their way.
the far right wants them to vanish from the map. And the Israelis are now trying to make them vanish from the map, but they're not being very successful. Uh, they're just, not being very successful. And news broke this afternoon that the Israelis are asking for more in relation to the ceasefire. That the ceasefire is not enough of a ceasefire for them. They're asking for more because they cannot handle Hamas. They still cannot, and they cannot handle Hezbollah either.
No, they can't.
And so they want more ceasefire, right now. If I'm Hamas, okay, and Hezbollah, okay, I tell them to go to hell and say, when they're ready to negotiate the establishment of a Palestinian state, then we'll sit down. Okay, until then, we're going to fight. Of course, I can't speak for them because they're not killing me. So,
Exactly, yeah, because people
so
are
there
freezing
is
in the
that.
tents and starving.
There's that. It has to be up to them. They're resisting in horrendous situation, and I, would not blame them for anything that they decide to do. They have the right to decide because they're receiving the suffering. So that's where it is. I thought that was a brilliant piece, though, by Alistair Crowe.
Yeah, he writes very well. He's got an interesting analysis of putting the pieces together.
Yes, he puts it together very well because I think he has a unique perspective on the various countries in the Middle East and their historical conflicts. He just has such a deep knowledge of it that what he says is always eminently sensible.
Hmm.
And by the way, uh, as we saw in the last of his articles we cover here, he thinks there's a possibility that the Iranians are going to hit Israel back before Trump comes in.
They have to. They have to.
Yes, we've talked about why that's necessary for some time now. Okay, I didn't originally intend to include this in this program. By this, I mean uh, 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 a next article. Okay, but I was watching a video today of Doug McGregor, and this article was mentioned. The article involved is called uh, Iran. It continues America's next war of choice, and I'm sharing the article right now. The tagline is the U.S. is at risk of being buffaloed into a bloody war of regional realignment in the wake of Syria's collapse. And the authors of it are Douglas McGregor and James W. Carden. And Douglas McGregor, of course, is Colonel Douglas McGregor, the president of Our Country, Our Choice, president and CEO of that, a former advisor to the Defense Department of Donald Trump, and a former colonel who was a commander of tanks okay, in the Iraq War, and very much decorated, very successful. Anyway, he and James Carden wrote this on December 17th, 2024. I normally don't pick up pieces from the American Conservative, but this is not a typical piece from the American Conservative. So I'm going to go through this and comment on it. Peace is not at hand in the Middle East, and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu remains determined to expand the war. Syria's de facto partition into Israeli and Turkish territories is the prelude to wider war with Iran. As the Times of Israel reported last week, the Israeli Air Force, IAF, has, quote, continued to increase its readiness in preparations for, quote, potential strikes in Iran. All I have to say is it better increase its readiness and its preparations, because its most recent attack on Iran was a total flop. Anyway, Netanyahu's top priority is the destruction of Iran before Russia wraps up its victory in Turkey and Syria becomes a new battleground for Turks, okay, and Israelis. It's not simply the end of Washington's, quote, rules-based international order, unquote. It's the onset of chaos. So Doug is saying there's going to be chaos. Israeli forces and Turkish auxiliaries, i.e. the Islamist terrorists who sacked Syria, already staring at each other across a demarcation line that runs east-west just south of Damascus. Netanyahu harbors no illusions about the conflict between Ankara's long-term strategic aims in the region and Jerusalem's determination to claim the Syrian spoils of war. In addition to serious financial trouble and societal discontent on the home front, President-elect Donald Trump now confronts the dangerous distraction of wars he did not start. Wars that will bring his administration, his country, no strategic benefit. The U.S. underwriting of Netanyahu's expanding war in the Middle East will endanger U.S. national security and guarantee that Washington, its armed forces, and the U.S. economy will be hostage to whatever strategic direction Netanyahu decides to take. Starting the war sooner rather than later is critical for Netanyahu. War with Iran presents Trump with a strategic fait accompli. In case Trump decides to distance the United States from another bloodbath in the Middle East, Israel's ongoing conflict with Iran and Turkey's potential confrontation with Israel will make disengagement impossible. American policy planners need to understand the larger context in which this is all unfolding and why a war on Iran will ultimately bring us and our alleged Israeli friends to grief. Note that well, folks. Ultimately bring us and our alleged Israeli friends to grief. Note both, the alleged, but also the prediction. The principal aim of U.S. foreign policy planners ought to be, this is worth highlighting, I think. The principal aim of U.S. foreign policy planners ought to be the adaptation of the American economy and military establishment to the multipolar world and the development of new markets, not new enemies. Washington's refusal to acknowledge the fundamental shifts in power and wealth lie at the heart of much of the Biden's administration policy failure. I could not agree more. Doug and his collaborator go on to say, successful management of change would avoid a conflict with Iran. It would peacefully reconcile competing claims. I think I'm going to highlight that too. For regional hegemony, as the Chinese recently did with their brokering of the historic rapprochement between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It would revitalize such multilateral organizations as the UN Security Council and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. These actions would cultivate the emergence of new constellations of power along the lines of Metternich and Castlereagh's 1815 Concert of Europe. That is an interesting idea for those familiar with the history of international relations. The Concert of Europe, while very reactionary, established the lines for a century of European peace between 1815 and 1914. Of course, there were some exceptions, but still the Concert of Europe was the dominant factor throughout all that time. So this statement is perhaps very significant, but it depends on the spinning out of it with respect to details that Doug, I suppose, will continue with the rest of this article to do. Just as no question of strategic security in Europe can be solved without Russian participation, Washington cannot create stability in the Middle East by unconditionally backing Israel's territorial ambitions. So here's a conservative, the president of our country, our choice, an advisor in an earlier Trump administration, and in my view, the person he should have appointed as his candidate for Secretary of Defense in this administration. And he's saying an American failure to manage its own transition to multipolarity will create more chaos and ignite a major war in the Middle East, not to mention a full-blown war with Russia and eventually China. An outlook that prioritizes avoiding conflict, not starting new conflicts, must replace nearly 3 decades of feckless leadership in foreign affairs. Notice that the 3 decades includes Bill Clinton's administration, the Bush 43-2 administrations, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. All, according to Doug, feckless leadership in foreign affairs. New thinking in defense and foreign policy should rank diplomacy and peaceful cooperation first over the use of military power. I couldn't agree more. This is especially true because we lack the military power we think we have. Bonaparte quipped that in war, truth is the first casualty. Nothing has changed since then. Washington is a veritable fountainhead of lies, feeding an unending stream of false narratives regarding the true character of the jihadist hordes raging across Syria. I wouldn't exactly call them hordes. I mean, what is there? 30,000, 35,000 people in those so-called hordes? I mean, if the IRGC were to send 100,000 troops into Syria, it could sweep them all aside. For our purposes, however, it is important to note the alignment of powers behind the Islamist factions now pillaging and terrorizing Syria. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly call them hordes. In terms of modern war, they're pretty much a handful. I don't think they're even as much as the Ukrainian troops who invaded the Kursk region and who are now getting mopped up by Russia in the final stages of that war. Washington seems blithely oblivious to Syria's destruction and the emergence of joint Israeli-Turkish hegemony across the Near East. Yeah, blithely oblivious, Washington, right? I mean, blithely oblivious to multipolarity, blithely oblivious to anything important. The disintegration of Syria does, however, open up a short window of opportunity for Tel Aviv to attack Iran. Here we go. As the Times of Israel report noted, while previously the quote IAF would not fly directly over Damascus with carrying out strikes on Iran-linked targets in the capital, it now can, quote, yes, because Israel just destroyed all the air defenses of Syria. And once the government was overthrown, there was no one to do the air defense. So Israel bombed it all and destroyed it all. Netanyahu believes he has the wind at his back. Emboldened by the collapse of the Assad regime, he will turn his attention to Lebanon, southern Syria, and the West Bank. What predictable consequence of an attack on Iraq will be a solidifying of the Chinese brokered Iran-Saudi rapprochement and a hardening of the blocs in the greater Middle East, which will see Iran, backed by Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, set against a temporary Israel-Turkish bloc backed by Washington and its European vassals. Iran is not Iraq. At 90 million people, says Doug, it is double Iraq's population. More than double Iraq's population. I think Iraq's population is 26 million. But last I checked, I mean, even if it's a little more, even if it's 33 million or 30 million, 90 million is 3 times Iraq's population. Has a more developed economy, that's true, and it has more powerful allies than Saddam Hussein ever did. Contrary to neoconservative expectations, there are no cakewalks in the greater Middle East. The only certainty amid the chaos is that thanks to the connivance of Biden, Netanyahu, and Erdogan, a wider war in the greater Middle East is only just beginning. It is one we will come to regret. And that is that article by Douglas, which I thought was a great one, in which I hope will get to Trump's desk somehow. Maybe he won't read it himself, but maybe he can have a friendly person read it to him. I'm not saying that Trump can't read. I know very well he can. But even though this is an enormously short article, I think he will resist reading the whole thing. I mean, it can't be more than 1,000 words, I don't think. But it is a tremendously significant article. It outlines the situation correctly for Trump and tells him why we can't be involved in a war with Iran. And he is absolutely correct about that. So, where are we now? Okay, let us go into the comments.
Yes. I was going to say, we're in a very dangerous place right now.
We are in a very dangerous place. There's a great deal of uncertainty because we do not know. We do not know the line that Trump is going to take, but the initial evidence based on his appointments that he continues to announce indicate that if personnel is policy, then the policy he's leading up to is disastrous. It means war with Iran. It means continued granting to Israel a blank check to do what it wants to do. It means the Russians will respond in kind. Oh, by the way, there was a news item today that Russia has sent troops to Iran. Why would Russia be sending troops to Iran? Well, obviously, to help to protect Iran against any possible attack from Israel in the West.
Yeah, because we've got these lunatics.
But
That.
if Russia is willing to send troops to Iran to help to protect it, to put its people in danger of being killed, then is Russia really not planning to back Iran with its hypersonic missiles and with such devices as the Oreshnik? If it's putting its own soldiers in harm's way, won't it be willing to use its great advantage, in missiles to thwart any possible invasion by the Israelis and the United States in combination? I think it's a very dangerous sign that they just sent troops to Iran. No doubt those troops will be involved in further strengthening of the air defense system, of Iran, and perhaps in training the Iranians to use new hypersonic missiles, which the Russians intend to give to them. Perhaps the Russians intend to give them some Oreshniks. If so, that means even more devastating treatment of U.S. carriers that are in the vicinity, and even more devastating treatment for those 68 bases of the U.S. surrounding the country of Iran, which I think remain hostages to fortune. Steve Wolfbrand says, in LA, Christmas is tamale season. All the women make them. You have to tell each woman that her tamales are the best. Well, at the time you're eating them, Steve, aren't they the best, in fact? Lana says, HTS Hayat Tahrir El Sham. Yes, quote unquote. Steve says, fierce tamale competition here. Kay says, Steve says, Kay, better days are coming. Ivana says, I read HTS has already sequestered 60 Alawite women. How long before the true colors are quickly revealed, notwithstanding the reform image they're trying to portray? About 5 minutes, Evelina. Steve says, a friend in Costa Rica says Chinese EVs are all over our roads. Well, maybe we all ought to move to Costa Rica so we can get ourselves a Chinese EV. We might even be able to live well on Social Security there if we're fortunate enough to have it. Evelina says, I think as we begin to see what happens to women in Syria, the reformed al-Golani will blow his cover. I think he will blow his cover. The reformed Golani, his cover blown, will prove to be a headache for the U.S. Yes. Steve Wolfbrand says, Israel is an evil state. So you see the way this is shaping up now. Trump is not entirely predictable. And he is not entirely predictable because people who have observed him for a long time agree that Trump is mercurial. He operates, on intuition. And sometimes his intuition runs completely counter to anything his advisors are proposing. And he has no trouble telling his advisors to go to hell because he always thinks he knows best. So that could bring us good fortune. It could mean that in spite of all of the idiots and evil people he is currently appointing, that he may decide in foreign policy to do something sensible. He may decide to accept the kinds of views that Doug McGregor expressed in his recent article. Those represent the ultimate in common sense for the new world that Trump is facing. Doug is a great advocate for those views. If he gets a chance to express those views to Trump, there's a good chance, I think, that Trump will be open to those views, because I don't think Trump wants to get caught in a quagmire. In his first term, he did not get caught in a quagmire, at least in foreign policy. I mean, his foreign policy was terrible with respect to Yemen, of course, and he endorsed all the bombing and stuff like that. But it wasn't a quagmire for him. It wasn't simply a destructive thing the U.S. got totally caught up in that represented all kinds of trouble for his administration. He didn't get into the kind of trouble Biden has done in the foreign policy area. He had the good sense to avoid conflict, even conflict with Iran. There were people wanting Trump to go into to Iran, and just got rid of them. But he'd listened to cooler heads, or his intuition told him that it was not a good deal to go to Iran in that way. And hopefully he may decide here, when he gets briefed by people from the Defense Department, it's so important that he appoints some good people to the Defense Department. I think Hegseth is going to get rejected by Congress. And maybe,
He better get rejected.
I know, because he's a real dumbass. But if some of his other appointments are fairly good, and if he does get to someone as Secretary of Defense who's sensible, if he gets to a Doug McGregor type, then he could be getting true information out of the Defense Department that runs counter to the bullshit that the CIA is going to hand him. We know that the CIA and the NSA and the other intelligence agencies are going to hand him crap. We know Tulsi Gabbard, if she makes it through Congress, which the CIA will try to prevent, we know she's going to try to prevent Trump getting a bunch of crap from the CIA. But whether she can stop the flow of crap from her position of Director of National Intelligence, I do not know. Anyway, this is all up in the air. We are up in the air. What we may do in the Mideast, is up in the air. Maybe we'll have some more hints on Thursday. I will be back on Thursday after Christmas. But meantime, I wish you all a happy Christmas tomorrow. I will take some final comments. Friar Steve says, hello, D and Doc. No good fortune will come from an irrational player. You got your wish. Now live with the results. He will all a genocide in Gaza. He already said it. He is saying this with respect to Trump. He may not continue to support a genocide, depending on what Iran does. I know what he already said, but that doesn't mean he's going to go through it. He very often says lots of stupid things, and then he doesn't go through with them. We all know that. So Didn't Trump express a desire to close some bases in the Middle East? He did. But of course, as I just said, you can't trust anything he says. He'll say various things, then he'll back away from them. Friar Steve says, Trump will bomb Iran. You wanted him. You earned what he does to Iran and Gaza. I didn't want Trump, Friar Steve. I did not vote for Trump. Okay, I gritted my teeth and I voted for Kamala. I guess I just had the intuition that however foolish she seemed during the campaign, and however submissive to the deep state she was during the campaign, and however submissive she was to the Israeli lobby during the campaign, that at bottom she had more sense, okay, than that, and that she would try to seek a peace, okay, in the Middle East. I had the feeling, I don't know where I got it from, that she would not stomach the genocide if she were the president of the United States. So I took a flyer, okay, and I voted for her because I thought the chances were that Trump would be worse for the Middle East. And I also calculated that the Russians would finish the Ukraine war before Trump even got into the White House. So I didn't think that his value in bringing us to peace, okay, in Ukraine would be realized. So I didn't think it was a factor. So I judged the voting pretty much on the risk of bringing us to nuclear war inside of the Middle East. And I thought that Kamala was less likely to bring us to the point of war in the Middle East. I agree, I may have been wrong about that, but some other people who think like I do thought that there was a better chance that Trump, would move us away from the risk of nuclear war. I thought that their intuition was wrong, okay, and mine was right. But now that I see Trump there, of course, I'm doing my best to show through these streams that the sensible thing for him to do, is to ignore all the advice he's getting and to disengage from the hegemonic effort and accept the multipolar system in international relations. Friar Steve says Tulsi has no value. She faked left. Well, I don't know if she faked left. Seems to me she faked left and she faked right. I don't know what basis you have for thinking that her left was more of a fake than her right. Friar Steve says, Merry Christmas to all. He says, Happy New Year, Doc. And Friar Steve says, bye, D. Peace in 2025 is my wish for you, D. Well, thank you, Friar Steve, for that wish.
Thank you. Peace to you, Friar Steve.
Yes, and peace to all of us in 2025.
Yes, and so it be.
We at least can hope for that. But meanwhile, on Thursday, we will continue this kind of analysis. I may put a break in here one of these days and start talking about monetary sovereignty, because every once in a while people have to be reminded about that, especially since the international relations people keep on talking about, the reserve currency, and we're no longer the reserve currency, and that's going to be a total tragedy and we'll never recover from it, and we need the oil to back us, and all this bullshit. This is all bullshit. and I'm going to have a stream on what kind of bullshit this is
That's a good idea.
in the near future, because this is bullshit. Just
Oh, it is.
And as good as these, okay, some of our favorite people now in terms of IR analysis, including the people we always talk about here, the people we read from today, also Pepe Escobar, Douglas McGregor, uh, Scott Ritter, the whole raft of people, Scott probably the least among them, are sure of their crazy views about how important, the national debt is and how we can't possibly cope with it unless we have oil to back us. All these people have no economics background to speak of. They are not economists insofar as they have economics background. They are neoliberal types of economists, or worse, they follow the Austrian school, okay, of economics. So their economics is junk economics. They don't understand how federal financing occurs and what lies behind it. And they don't want to learn. They don't want to take the time to learn. So whenever they start talking about economics or make comments about the debt or stuff like that, I warn you against those comments because they have no value. And one day soon, I'm going to do a show on that. Hey, Lana, you still here? I don't know if Lana's still here, but she knows also that those views have no value. And Dee knows too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes, it's infuriating every time you see it.
yeah, every time you see it, you say, oh, God, not again.
Exactly.
So, on that note, let us say good night and let us hope that after the holidays, our attendance jumps up somewhat.
Yes.
My
Yes, it is.
indicator is showing 12 people today. For weeks, we have 50 or more. And suddenly, here we are again at 12 or 13 or 14 now. Okay. I love the 12 to 15 we have, but this stream cannot survive without having many, many more people coming.
Yes, you want people to receive the news, and be part of the discussion that you're having.
Yes, and we also want to have some economic basis for these efforts. I mean,
Yes.
how long can I go on when we basically have no people? I mean, I'm putting in all kinds of time on this.
Oh, I know. It takes a lot of time to put everything together.
Sure, it does. Okay, I know you're working hard also. And, okay, I don't know if you have some sinecures to live on, but all I have is Social Security, and that's not enough.
Right.
I mean, I got to have some economic basis for this, or I have to stop it. I'm pretty stubborn, and I love it a lot. So,
Well, that's it. You're getting out, and I find it too. It's it's therapeutic to discuss all this.
yes, it's therapeutic to discuss all this, and I love it. Okay, and that's why I stick with it, but I don't know if I can stick with it forever. So, I need a lot more people. Okay, even though you came tonight are all wonderful. Okay, and I'm glad Kay Ryan came back.
Yes, it's good to see Kay.
And it was good to see all the rest of you too.
Oh, it is. I know. I just love seeing everybody's name
Yeah,
in the comments.
me too. And some of the newer folks like the Earl, okay, of Lurie. Uh, okay, and also Monica Augustine. Very, very welcome.
Yes.
So, everybody, good night and Merry Christmas again. I'll be back Thursday, so, and I'll be back Saturday. So, I'll be able to wish you Happy New Year's on those days.
Okay. Steve Wolfbrand.
Says Doc, I'll send you a bump. Thank you, Steve. That would be wonderful and very welcome.
Okay, good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, Dee, and thank you very much for your
Yes.
contributions tonight.
Oh, here come Friday. Steve says, to all a good night. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Friar Steve. And thank you for coming.
Yes, and Evelina, happy Christmas.
Yes, happy Christmas, Evelina. And happy Christmas to everybody who prefer a happy Christmas to a Merry Christmas. Evelina says happy Xmas to all.
Yes. Okay, good night, all.
Okay, good night, everybody, and good night, Dee.